Has everybody scanned the QR code? I'm about to take it down. Okay.
Hi everyone, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Patty Moran. I'm the Assistant Dean of the First Year Experience in the Undergraduate College here at UT Austin. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second lecture of the Spring 2024 Helen and Jeff Herbert Family University Lecture Series, which is brought to you through a generous gift from Helen and Jeff Herbert. We thank the Herbert family for making this lecture series possible. We're gathered here tonight to explore the knowledge and expertise related to leadership and ethics that our faculty bring to the 40 acres. This spring's lecture series will muse and pose questions on this topic that we hope will benefit us all at various points of life where we currently find ourselves. It's our hope that you will find points of connection to reflect on at your time at the University of Texas unfolds. How many of you, since you became a student at UT, have been told by someone you trust to follow your lead? Right here? These brave people in front, I like that. When you've approached them with a question you have about your education or your career aspirations or a version of that advice. Who in here has at some point in your life been told to think for yourself? That everybody's right. Our lecturer tonight is here to ponder with you. How does one follow a lead or think for oneself? As leaders in any field develop, how often do they rely on their own teachers, their own mentors and role models to help them answer these questions? Our lecturer tonight, Dr. Anat Schechtman, is here to ponder these questions and developing leadership skills with you. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Schechtman. Dr. Schechtman joined the philosophy department at UT as an associate professor in the fall of 2022. Previously, she's been an assistant professor at the University of Chicago and an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Philosophy and Math from Tel Aviv University and her PhD in philosophy from Yale. She is currently writing a book on notions of infinity in 17th century philosophy. And in addition to classes in early modern philosophy, she teaches a signature course on philosophy and the meaning of life. When not writing or teaching, she enjoys yoga, cooking, fiction, and spending time with her partner and their 2 kids. And finally, before we begin, I want to remind you that during our talk, you should be sending us questions for our speaker by using the QR code that showed up earlier. After the lecture, we'll be asking a few of your questions to our speaker, so please remain seated after the formal presentation. We will be finished by 8 p.m., so please consider the Q&A part of the lecture series. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Anat Schechtman.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Dr. Moran, for this very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight, giving me an opportunity to speak to you. So when Dr. Moran first asked me to deliver this lecture, I was very honored and very happy for this opportunity, but I have to say I was a little bit worried when she told me what the theme for the semester was, which is leadership. Because I am a trained philosopher. I teach, I write philosophy, and there's a kind of image of philosophers that I have to admit I bought into a little bit of not exactly the most practical people, the ones who are kind of, down there in the world, helping people figure out issues more. We tend to be thought of as kind of, in our studies or armchair, thinking hard about hard questions, but kind of aloof and disconnected maybe from reality. And my kids are here and they have 2 philosophers for parents, so they probably kind of somewhat sympathize with that. So in trying to think, okay, how do I tackle this question of leadership from a philosophical perspective, I kind of turned to the history of philosophy to find help. And specifically to this very rich period in the history of philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, 5th, 4th century before the Common Era, in Athens, Greek, which had a lot of the kind of monumental figures in philosophy that we still think of and know of today. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, figures you may have heard of kind of throughout your studies. So I was thinking, okay, how can those guys help me? Can they help me say something about philosophy and leadership? And the first figure that came to mind looking at this painting of Greek philosophers from Athens, in painting by Raphael from 1511. The first person that came to mind was Plato. So Plato is right there at the center, one of the towering figures in philosophy of all centuries. He's right there at the center. And Plato actually thought that philosophers would be great leaders. In fact, he thought philosophers would be the best leaders. Why? Because he thought, well, philosophers are experts on the human soul and how the soul is structured. And the city is kind of like the soul, they're very similar. A well-structured city is kind of like a well-structured soul. So someone who understands the human soul will be the best ruler. They should be the philosopher. In fact, it's thought that a philosopher king or a philosopher queen would be the best. Okay, sounds interesting. And when we think through the history of philosophy, that this one example comes to mind of a philosopher who was a king, or in fact, an emperor. So Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor and a Stoic philosopher belonging to the school of Stoicism. Okay, so sounds good. Maybe philosophers can be leaders after all. But this is just one example, and generally, still, I have a suspicion that maybe we will not make the best leaders, and others will share this suspicion. So here's a little comics for you, kind of making fun of this idea. So we see Plato, and someone comes to him and says, King Plato, one of your lords has attacked our outpost, we demand justice. And Plato says, but what even is justice? And the person says, what do you mean? Plato says, well, you say you want justice, so you must know what it is. And the person, of course, has no patience for this. It seems kind of a silly exercise to be engaging in when you're actually trying to figure out politics. So maybe not the best leader in this case. Okay, so I'm continuing to think about how philosophy and leadership connect, going back to the history, looking for other cases. And then it occurred to me that maybe if philosophers are not the best leaders, maybe they at least have something to contribute as the teachers of leaders. Okay, so looking again at our collection of Greek philosophers, two other figures kind of jumped out at me. One of them is the person right next to Plato, Aristotle. Aristotle was another one of those very important Greek philosophers, and in fact the student of Plato, so they're right there in the center together. And then we also have another important Greek philosopher, Socrates. So he's not at the center, he's kind of the one in the green outfit looking away. Socrates was Plato's teacher, so here we have Plato flanked by his teacher on the one hand and his student on the other hand. And each of them had some stuff to say about philosophers qua teachers of leaders. So, starting with Aristotle, Aristotle in fact was the teacher of a very important leader. He was the teacher of Alexander the Great, one of the greatest military leaders that ever existed, who conquered half of Asia and all of Europe. He's a very important figure. Aristotle was his teacher when he was younger. So, okay, that's good. There's a connection between philosophy and leadership, at least the philosopher is the teacher of the leader. And then switching to Socrates, Socrates saw himself as having something very important to contribute to the leaders of the city and also the citizens of the city. So he said that he is like a gadfly, a horsefly, on the side of the city. So here's Socrates, the body of a fly. Why so? Here's Socrates saying about himself, I was attached to the city, speaking about Athens, as upon a great and noble horse, which was somewhat sluggish because of its size and needed to be stood up by a kind of a gadfly, a horsefly, like a fly that bites and is very painful when it bites. I never cease to rouse each and every one of you, to persuade and reproach you all day long. So this is Socrates, actually it's in Plato's work, but these words are put in Socrates' mind. So Socrates is saying, look, to the leader and also to the citizens of the city, I have something to contribute as this kind of contrarian figure, someone who rouses you, persuades you, reproaches you, telling you that you can do better, right? You can kind of don't be so self-satisfied, seek to do better with yourselves, kind of teaching them how to both live better and be better citizens. Okay, so I thought, okay, we are onto something. Maybe philosophers do have something to say about how to lead, and specifically this idea of following your own lead. So that's how I came up with the title of this lecture. And I want to explore it further with you, specifically by turning to my signature course, which Dr. Moran mentioned, The Meaning of Life, and pull some of the themes that I discussed with my students to kind of look more into this idea of following your own lead and how philosophy can help you do that. So I teach UJS 303, a bigger lecture course where we talk about the meaning of life. Just to give you a taste of the topics we talk about, we kind of go through a variety of interesting topics. We talk about happiness, we talk about love and why love matters and how it contributes to a more meaningful life. We talk about morality. So can you be a good person and have a meaningful life? Or is there some kind of tension or competition between those two things? Is it selfish or egotistical to seek a meaningful life? We talk about that. We talk about religion. We talk about death. So how does the fact that we are mortal and have a very definitive and short lifespan relevance to thinking about meaning in life? And then finally we talk about authenticity and being yourself and finding your true self and why that may matter. So these are all topics that we cover. So I thought that just bring a couple of those topics, a couple of the texts and things that we talk about and kind of explore them together with you. To start doing that, I want to bring in a figure or a case that helps us in my class think about the meaning of life as a kind of case that we keep coming back to. And it will be helpful to have this case here tonight as well. And the case is of the Greek mythological character or figure of Sisyphus. So, I'm sure a lot of you know the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was, in Greek mythology, someone who angered the gods. I don't remember exactly what he did, but in a way it doesn't matter because the gods are very easy to get angry. It doesn't take much to get them angry. So he made them angry and they decided to punish him. And the punishment he got is, of course, to push a huge rock up the side of a mountain or to roll it up the side of a mountain all the way to the top just to have it roll down again. And then he needs to do it again, and he needs to do it again, and he needs to do it again, and so on throughout eternity. That's his punishment. So people have often kind of thought about Sisyphus and saw him as a kind of a symbol for meaninglessness, hopelessness, right? This idea that you're condemned to do this thing that completely doesn't matter and it's just pointless, but you have to do it again throughout eternity. One philosopher who saw the story this way is 20th century philosopher Herbert. He wrote a whole book about this case. So Camus says, the gods had thought with some reason that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor. This is a terrible punishment exactly because it's futile and hopeless. So when we talk about this case, we kind of ask ourselves whether we agree with that. So just as a baseline, I want to ask you whether you agree with the kind of intuition. Do you have the intuition that this life is meaningless? So let me kind of make it more specific. When we think about the life of Sisyphus from the perspective of Sisyphus himself, right, the person who's living this life, does it seem like a kind of meaningless, pointless life, or can you find some kind of meaning in it? And I'm emphasizing that it's about that person himself, because when I ask my students this question, they often say, well, Sisyphus' life was maybe kind of pointless and hopeless, but look at us all now discussing him, right? He has something to teach us by reflecting on him, so maybe his life has meaning after all. So I want to acknowledge that, but in a way bracket this kind of external perspective and ask from the internal perspective, kind of thinking about him, the person living that life, do you think that that life is completely meaningless, or maybe there's a way of finding meaning in it? So I just want to do a quick show of hands to see where everyone is before we keep going. So who thinks that Sisyphus' life, to Sisyphus himself, from his perspective, is meaningless? Raise your hand if you think it's meaningless. Don't be shy. He can't hear you. He can't see you. Okay, good. And who thinks that, there's a sense in which to him himself the life is meaningful? Okay, interesting. Good. So I'm going to bracket Sisyphus for just a couple of minutes, but we're going to come back to him in a little bit. So don't forget about him. He's going to come back. So one important philosopher for my class, Emily, that we talk about and that my students keep bringing back again and again, they really like that work, is by a contemporary philosopher, so not a Greek philosopher, but someone who's alive today. Oops, sorry, wrong arrow. Her name is Susan Wolf. She's now a retired professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And a few years ago, she published this book, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters, and we discuss big chunks of it in my class. And what she tries to do in this book is to give a few views of what makes life meaningful and then try to help readers decide which one is correct. So let me give you a couple of views that she considers, and then I'm going to ask you which one seems more plausible to you. So, One view that Wolf thinks is kind of very intuitive and is very common in the culture and that students hear, or young people hear quite a bit, is this idea that what makes life meaningful is to kind of find your passion, do what is right for you, do the thing that drives you, that motivates you, find that, and go for it. So she calls this the fulfillment view, and the thought is that it really doesn't matter what you do with your life for it to be meaningful, as long as this is something that you love and that fulfills you. Right? The thought is that it's really about you and finding the thing that is right for you. That's the most important thing, and if you do that, if you manage to do that, then your life will be meaningful. And she thinks it's kind of a familiar advice. She doesn't think it's something that's completely new, and that it's kind of part of the culture, that it is something that people would hear a lot. Like, do what you love and you will not work a day in your life, right? To find your passion and go for it. One person who says it this way is Steve Jobs. Said it this way, right? The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it, keep looking, don't settle. Right? So this idea that you need to find what you love, and once you do, you're all set. So that's one view. And then Wolf contrasts it with another view, a competing view, one that says, look, it's not about you and what you love, rather it's about finding an aim that is greater than yourself. So she calls it the larger than yourself view, aptname. In order to live a truly meaningful life, one needs to get involved in something that is larger than oneself. And again, this is a view that is not something new or could be something you've never heard. It's also part of the culture, where this idea to find a greater purpose, find something that is greater than yourself. I think you can kind of read it into a slogan here at UT, right? What starts here changes the world, right? It's not what starts here changes you, or what starts here is going to fulfill you. No, it's about the world. It's about finding something that makes an impact, kind of outside of you. Okay, so we have these two views, and they're competing, right? They can't both be right, because one of them says, it's all about you. It's what you find fulfilling, what you love. It's about your passion, you. The second one says, it's not about you at all, right? It's about something that is larger than you. So thinking about these two views, I'm curious to hear, if you had to pick one of them, which one would you say is more plausible? And I actually want to hear from a couple of you what you think. So we have a microphone in the back, and we have time to take a couple of answers to this question.
I think the larger than yourself view is honestly better. The way that I'm seeing it, I would envision myself as doing something like charitable. And I think it's more plausible because with fulfillment, a lot of people just chase whatever they don't know for the rest of their lives, thinking it's a passion. And that's just, it's impractical. I feel like the other way, you'll actually feel like you're doing something out of your life.
I agree with him. I think that I want to find something larger than myself, be a part of something bigger, so that I can change the world.
Does anyone want to do one like
I do see the merits of that argument, but I almost disagree in a sense, because I do feel that fulfillment comes and goes, and it's not something that has just this one end result. You can see it in many different ways of life. You go through so many different changes, and I really think at the end of the day you have yourself, and I think that's kind of what matters to me. Fulfillment, yeah.
Thank you. So if we had more time, we could continue discussing
This, but I want to kind of move us on to how Susan Wolf uses those two views and the contrast between them to kind of propose her own view. And to do that, we need to go back to Sisyphus for a second. So here's Sisyphus again. And the way that Wolf brings it in is to take him, but then introduce a twist in the story. So you'll see how it connects back to the two views in a moment. But she takes the story and she says, okay, here's Sisyphus. We know the story. We all know the story by now. He's pushing the rock. He's been doing it for a couple of millennia by now. And let's imagine, here's the twist, that at some point the gods started feeling kind of sorry for him, kind of started feeling like maybe they were too harsh on him, so they decided to give him a break. And this is what they decided to do. They said, well, he's going to have to continue to push the stones. We're not going to change that. But we're going to do a little bit of magic, because we're gods, we can do that. We're going to do a little bit of magic, and we're going to make it the case that from now on, he actually really loves rolling rocks pushing stones up the hill. That's going to be our relief to him. We're going to make it the case that he really likes it. That's his one passion in life now. From now on, he's going to be completely devoted to this idea of rolling stones. He can't get enough of it, he just wants to do it all day long. So this twist is actually coming from an older work by Richard Taylor, who says, let's suppose that Sisyphus' one desire in life is to roll stones, and he's absolutely guaranteed it's endless fulfillment. So all kind of try to imagine that. Now what? What should we say about him now? So, does that make a difference? I know a lot of you thought his life was already meaningful, so in a way maybe you don't need this extra bit, but I'm particularly interested in hearing from students who thought that his life was meaningless before, whether this twist changes your view. So if before you thought that Sisyphus' life is meaningless, now that he's completely fulfilled by pushing stones and that's like the one thing he wants to do, does that change your view about this case? So again, we have time for one or two.
I think it does make his life meaningful because to him, at least, it does seem more, because he's happy just rolling stones. And there's examples of people who have continuous and ongoing goals, like either running a book or running a cafe, and if they're happy continuously doing that, they say that life is, meaningful and happy for them. In that same sense, Sisyphus is happy now. Except the only part I'd argue is that the gods made him happy, and he did not find his meaning on his own, which makes it a little more complicated.
I think depends
on your answer to the first question. If you think that the meaning of life
is found in serving some greater purpose, then no, his life does not have meaning here, because rolling stones doesn't benefit anybody. But if the meaning of life is found in your own fulfillment, care about, then I the latter. I feel that personal what the meaning. Why? I think the best I can come to is that devoting myself to my own life.
So it's a very astute observation that
Those questions of the way are.
you're already inclined to think that fulfillment is what you should be going for, then of course, now that Sisyphus is fulfilled, it seems like, yeah, his life is meaningful. So in a way, it's kind of, yes, it's closely connected to the first question, but sometimes in philosophy, we kind of need to reflect on a concrete case to then see what we think more generally. It sometimes helps to kind of test our intuitions in one case and then kind of start generalizing from them. So Wolf is someone who's convinced that this twist in the story is not going to make Sisyphus' life more meaningful if it wasn't meaningful already. And going back to the initial intuition, if you had the intuition that pushing stone up a hill sounds like a terrible life, as Camus said it nicely, it's futile, it's hopeless, it just doesn't kind of lead to anything. You don't do anything. You're just doing this kind of utterly task that just doesn't have any result, and you just have to repeat it again and again. And you might think, just because you enjoy it, doesn't make it better now. And that's Wolf's view. So she kind of takes that case to show that no, fulfillment cannot be enough, because then even Sisyphus, in his fulfilled version, would have a meaningful life, but she has the intuition that he doesn't. So let's go back to Wolf and kind of look at what she proposes instead. She says, well, fulfillment is not going to be enough, because you can be fulfilled by all kinds of strange things like rolling stones, even stranger things that might occupy your days. But she thinks the larger than yourself view is also not going to be enough, because you can be miserable doing something that even you're contributing to the greater good, it's just not a good fit for you. Maybe you're a doctor, but you only kind of sign into it because your family expected it from you, and you really don't like it. It's not for you. You always want to be an artist. So that's not going to be great either. She thinks you really have to have both. So in a way, it's kind of a trick, because she thinks it needs both. which is kind of, yeah, that seems to be probably right. Here's how she puts it. She says, look, what's unique to my view is that I think it has to be both. My conception of meaning, or about the category of value I have in mind, is that it involves subjective and objective elements suitably and inextricably linked. Right? It has to be both of those things linked together. So on the one hand, there's the subjective element, right? Finding your passion, doing what you love, feeling fulfilled by it. On the other hand, there's the objective element, contributing to something other than you, something that has objective value. Right? It's not just about you, it's about kind of the greater good or something that is valuable, not just because you yourself value it, but because it has value independently. In the end, she thinks that's the kind of meaning in life, that's the kind of state that we should be aspiring and working towards. So when we do this in my class, students tend to really like this view. It seems to kind of take the best of both other views and kind of combine them in this very intuitive way, and they kind of see that. But then we start to say, well, great, but what are the cases that have that? And then students tend to be less happy. In other words, when you ask the question of, okay, but what has objective value? What are the kind of occupations, passions, things that are worthy of love, the things that are objectively valuable, that are not just about you? It's a bit hard to say. And Woolf herself, when she tries to address this question, she kind of goes by giving a list of examples rather than trying to give a whole test that will apply in every case. So she says, okay, let me give you some cases where it seems like something really has objective value, is really worth doing, is really worthy of love, she says. In some cases where it seems like, no, there's no meaning, this is really not something that's worth doing, even if the person herself or himself are really into it. So she gives a bunch of examples. Let me give you some of her examples. So she thinks on the one hand, caring for someone has to be valuable. Caring for a loved one, a child, or an elderly relative, or a sick relative maybe, or caring more broadly in education, maybe healthcare. These are inherently valuable things. Clearly, you're kind of contributing to something other than yourself. So thumbs up for that. Caring for a person is great. But she says, if your whole life is dedicated to caring for a goldfish, that's not so great. That's kind of a waste of a life. And not just because the goldfish is small, right? It's not kind of the larger than yourself, it has to be a big animal, but rather because it seems like goldfish maybe are worthy of some love. I'm not saying they're not worthy of love, and Wolf is not saying they're not worthy of love at all, but not the kind of love that's now your life's project, to just care for that one goldfish. That's not going to be sufficiently valuable, says Wolf. Okay, another example, she thinks that playing a sport, like maybe having an athletic career or maybe playing a sport on the side, is very valuable. And she is from UNC Chapel Hill, so basketball is on her mind. She says playing basketball, that's great. Rolling Stones, not so much. Another contrast, doing philosophy, unsurprisingly, Wolf is a philosopher. That's something that can occupy a lifetime and kind of have objective value. But for some reason, she thinks that solving Sudoku puzzles, she's not so happy about that. She's imagining someone who's, again, not as on the side or as a hobby or something to just kind of wind down, but as the central occupation of their lives. That's what they do. They just solve Sudoku puzzles from morning to evening. That's not really a life worth living in her view. It doesn't have objective value. And then one more example, making art. Great, she thinks that's valuable. Counting blades of grass, not so much. If you're spending your life counting blades of grass, that's not so great. And inevitably, students will say, but what if counting blades of grass is your art? What if it's a performance piece and you can do it for artistic purposes? Okay, maybe that case is fine, but if you're just doing it because that's what you love doing, not so great. So this is where students often get uncomfortable because they're just wondering, how does Wolf come up with those examples, right? Is it just because she's a philosopher and she likes philosophy, and because she is a basketball fan and she likes basketball? Is that why she's putting those things on the left column, the things that do have objective value but not the others? Like, how does she come up with her list? And more generally, how do we know, especially young people who need to kind of choose a direction in life, how do we know what has objective value? So, we're not going to discuss those examples specifically now and try to decide, okay, is she right or is she wrong about those? We do this a bit more in my class and try to kind of figure out how can we tell what has objective value. But for our purposes, I want to kind of pivot to another theme or another topic that we discuss in class. It's kind of related to this, but coming at it from a slightly different angle. And that's the idea of kind of finding things in yourself to cultivate that have objective value. So kind of turning it to yourself. And to do that, I'm going to bring in another philosopher, so saying goodbye to Wolf, and bring in Aristotle again. So one of our ancient Greek philosophers, bring him back to the conversation and look at some of the texts, some of his texts that we discuss in the class. So Aristotle is also interested in this question of what has objective value, but he's looking at it not so much from the question of, okay, what should you do with your life? Should you be a farmer? Should you be a philosopher? Should you be a musician? That's not his question. He's not interested in occupations, professions so much. He's more interested in the question of how do we cultivate something of value in ourselves? How do we cultivate human excellence? How do we become better people, objectively speaking? That's his question. And to address this question, he's kind of saying, well, let's think about what makes us human. What is it about us? What's special about humans? Kind of what distinguishes us, what characterizes us as special, and once we identify that, we can kind of start thinking about, okay, so how do we become better humans? How do we become more successful, more flourishing, better at just being humans? And to do that, he introduces a term, the term characteristic activity. So let me just tell you a bit about what it is. So here's what Aristotle says. He says, just as the good, so this is going to be a bit of a dense passage, but we'll unpack it together. Just as the good of whatever has some characteristic activity or action is thought to lie in its characteristic activity, so the same would seem to be true of a human being, if indeed he or she or they had a characteristic activity. So it's a bit much, but we can kind of take it slow. So the first part, he says, look, for some things that have a characteristic activity, their good lies in their characteristic activity. And then maybe the same is true for us as well. So let me just put us to the side for a second. We'll come back to us in a moment, but just kind of look at the first part where he says, look, some things have a characteristic activity and they're doing well when they're doing that characteristic activity well. What does that mean? So to illustrate that, I like to use the following picture, which I have to warn you is a little bit brutal, but hopefully not too much. So we see a seal hunting a penguin. So some things have characteristic activity, and Aristotle thinks that animals are like that. So we think about other species, not human animals, but just animals. There's just the things that they do, right? The characteristic behaviors, the thing that they do in order to survive. So if you think about seals, they swim very fast, they're very stealthy when they hunt, right? There's the element of surprise, they kind of jump. And if you think about penguins, there's the things that they do, right? So they maybe swim in kind of a zigzagging pattern to avoid predators. They stay in groups, because numbers kind of guarantee safety. They're kind of behaviors that characterize a seal. And individual members of the species can be better or worse at that. So here we have a seal that is very good at being a seal, right? It just caught a penguin. And sadly, we have a penguin that is not as good at being a penguin. It's kind of failing in being a penguin, and sadly in the animal world, when you fail at being what you are, you get eaten often, so it's very sad for the penguin. But it helps us see that that thing that seals do, or that thing that penguins do, they can be better and worse at that. In other words, there can be more successful seals out there, there can be more successful penguins out there. Here we're seeing a successful seal and a not so successful penguin. So that's other animals, but okay, what about us? So coming back to us, Aristotle says, well, maybe that's true of us as well. Maybe we have the thing that we do, and we can do it better or worse. Hopefully when we do it worse, it doesn't mean that we get eaten, but still, there's a ways of being better and worse at being human. So coming back to us, he says, well, our characteristic activity is an activity of the soul in accordance with reason, or at least not entirely lacking it. That's what we do. In other words, what makes us human, what's kind of special to us, our characteristic activity or our kind of defining behavior is reasoning. That's kind of makes us special and distinct from other animals. And Aristotle says it's not just reasoning, it's not just theoretical thinking, it's not doing math problems, or not only that, or solving, playing chess, but it's rather action with reason. So it's a kind of practical form of reasoning. So that's what's unique to us. We act in a way that is informed by reason, not just automatically or instinctively the way a seal or a penguin behaves, right? The seal kind of hunts instinctively, the penguin tries to evade the seal instinctively, but we don't just act instinctively, we also act with reason. Okay, so what does that mean? Kind of how do we break it down further? And Aristotle thinks that the way to see how this works is to kind of look at different aspects of the human life and see that they involve this kind of making judgments, reasoning, making decisions, and that you can be better and worse at that. So it's kind of making decisions, acting in a way that is informed by reasoning, by thinking, by judgment, and that there are ways of doing that better and worse, and that we already know that, he just needs to bring that for us. So to show how that's supposed to work, then let me give you some examples of how Aristotle thinks that's kind of actually what's going on in everyday life. So I said that characteristic activity is reason-guided action, the ability to choose the mean, Aristotle thinks, or to kind of find the middle ground or the middle path between two extremes. That's really what it's all about. So let me just give you a bunch of examples. There's going to be a lot of them, but we're going to go work through them together. So he says, well, look, think about various areas where you kind of interact with other people, you need to make decisions, you need to conduct yourself, and then think about what it takes to do it well. And he thinks that in many of those cases, what it takes is to really kind of find the middle ground or the middle way between two extremes. You can be deficient, you can kind of do too little, or you can do too much. And the right thing to do is to find the middle ground. So here are some examples. So some interactions with other people, some areas of life require confidence, right? In school, when you're speaking in class, or with your peers, or for Aristotle, an important case is on the battleground, right? If you're going to battle for Athens, then you have to be confident. But you can have too little confidence. If you don't have enough confidence in a given situation, then you're a coward. That's what we call too little confidence. If you have too much confidence, then you're rash. Right? If you're on the battlefield and you're just kind of charging without paying attention to where the other people are, how strong the enemy is, that's just rash. That's not having the right amount of confidence. Or you can have the right amount of confidence, and that's just what courage is. Courage is being confident, but to the right degree. Not too much, but also not too little. So similarly with pleasure, you can be too pleasure-seeking, right? Too hedonistic, too indulgent, and that's intemperance, Aristotle thinks, but you can also be too indifferent to pleasure. If you're really kind of not, never indulging, never spending a day just kind of walking on, outside a nice spring day, enjoying the nice breeze and so on, you can be indifferent to that. That's also not good. There's something kind of lacking. You're not sensitive to how nice, the weather is. And if you enjoy pleasure, but not too much and not too little, that's temperance. That's kind of the right thing. Same with even money, right? So you can be too easy with your money, that's wastefulness, but you can also be too stingy. To be able to give money to the right degree is generosity. Same for honor, and same for anger. Aristotle thinks that you can be too angry. We all know people who are too angry. But you can also be not angry enough. And the person who is angry to the right degree is the even-tempered person. And the point is that what it is to do reason-guided action well, but what it is to act with reason well is to be able to thread that needle and to find that kind of golden mean or the middle ground in all the situations, to be the kind of person who knows how much to give, right? And what is the right amount to reach people, who knows when it is appropriate to kind of indulge a little bit, but when it's too much, to know when it's appropriate to be angry, but not to be too angry, and so on. That's the person who does this reason-guided action. So just to illustrate this a bit more, let's talk about anger for a moment. So when I think about someone who's too angry, I think about Achilles from Greek mythology again. So if you know the story of the War of Troy, there was a war, and the Trojans and the Athenians fought. And Achilles was kind of the hero, right? He was the big figure on the Greek side. And it turns out that Achilles was really angry for all kinds of reasons, specifically because his lover was killed by Hector, but he was just very angry. And the way, at least Homer tells the story, the whole War of Troy was in a way just because Achilles was so angry. So here's what Homer says in the Iliad, the poem about this battle. He says, "Sin goddess, Achilles' rage, black and murderous, that cost the Greeks incalculable pain, pitched countless souls of heroes into Hades' dark, and left their bodies to rot as feasts for dogs and birds, as Zeus' will was done." So this really green theme. And it's all because Achilles was so angry. He was so angry that he couldn't control himself, and he led people into battle that they were then killed unnecessarily. That's kind of the danger of being too angry, especially as a military leader. So, too angry, but there's also such a thing as not being angry enough. So if you think about kind of injustices in the world, you might think, kind of pick a cause that you care about, and you might think that other people are just not caring enough about it. They should be angrier about whatever it is that comes to mind, right? It's some cases of injustice require more anger, and if you're not angry, there's something wrong with that. And then, does being angry to the right degree? This specifically is a photo from protests in Iran from a couple years ago over women's rights. And the reason I like this picture is that that person is clearly angry, right? She's not kind of mildly angry. She's very angry. And the just right anger is not just the middle. It's not just kind of being between zero angry and the most angry you can be, just go the middle. No, the right amount of anger is always going to be appropriate to the situation. So the person who knows how to be angry well, right, the one who's good at anger, sometimes will be very angry, sometimes will not be very angry, because it all depends on what it is that she's angry about. And this person is arguably rightly very angry at violations of women's rights in Iran, so that's the kind of the right amount of anger for that situation. Okay, so I want to begin to wrap it up by just kind of saying, bringing this back to this idea of objective value, what is objectively valuable, and then also bring it back to our theme of philosophers as teachers. So let's start doing that. So going back to Aristotle and objective value, we said that what we do, what makes us human, rather than seals or penguins, is reason-guided action, right? Our ability to reason and make decisions or act in a way that is informed by decisions. And that to do that well, or to be excellent at it, is to be able to identify and choose the mean in any given situation. And Aristotle says, look, the person who's really good at this will be highly, highly sensitive to circumstances. She will be able to do it at the right time, about the right things, toward the right people, for the right end, and in the right way. But she'll take all those circumstances into account. So how angry should I be? Well, depending who is the kind of person I'm angry at, what are the circumstances, what else is going on, what mitigating circumstances there are, kind of all this is taken into account. So let's say that you're on board with me until now, you're really convinced, you think that yes, Aristotle really identified what it is to be an exemplary human being, right? Someone who really knows how to act, who's really sensitive, someone who's wise, someone who's well-adjusted, responding well. I'm on board, I want to be that. Tell me how to be like that, Aristotle. And Aristotle says, well, look, I told you, you have to do it at the right time, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, in the right way. Great, that's not very informative, right? So you're not telling me, okay, what is the right way? Who are the right people? Who I should be angry at? Tell me, Aristotle. But the point is that Aristotle can tell you, because that's exactly what it is to be good at it. You have to be able to decide for yourself. You have to be able to judge for yourself. So back to our theme of following our own lead, how can we learn to do that if we're not already good at this? Like, how do we become better at this kind of stuff? How do we learn to follow our own lead if we don't feel like we know how to do that? So Aristotle does have an answer to this, so let me give you that answer. And the answer, he says, is to kind of think about other areas where this happens. So it's not so special about kind of reason-guided action, about following your own lead. There are a lot of cases where you kind of get better at something, even though initially you don't quite know what it is that you're doing. And that's all kinds of skilled activities. So think about something that you're very skilled at, or think about kind of skills that you have or that other people that you know have, and think about how that works. So for example, athletic skill. So this is Len doing a bicycle kick, so incredible athletic skill of a soccer player, or a musician. So this is Mitsuko Uchida, legendary pianist, amazing musician. Or a cook. So this is a fictional character, those of you who've seen The Bear, a show that is run recently. It's about cooks, and this is one of the characters, Sydney, and she's an amazing cook. She's a really, really good cook. Right? So these are all skilled activities, and the reason it's helpful to think about this is because there's something helpful happening here. Right? To become a really amazing athlete, to become a really amazing cook, to become a really amazing musician, you kind of have to develop that sensitivity, the ability to kind of respond to the situation, right? It's not about having great technique at all, alone. So a musician can have amazing technique, an athlete can have amazing athletic prowess, a cook can have all these fancy techniques of high-end cuisine, but they need more than that. they need to be able to kind of know how to use them and how to respond to the situation. So the soccer player on the field needs to not only have amazing athletic abilities, but also know when to do that, when this is appropriate, but also when is it appropriate to pass the ball, when is it appropriate to do something else, depending on the team, depending on what's going on, depending on the rivaling team. A pianist similarly needs to know not just kind of all the techniques, but also when to play louder, when to kind of pull it back, when to go faster, and so on. So they're responding, they're making decisions, not kind of sitting and thinking about it, they're making decisions in action, but this is action that is informed by judgment, by reasoning. And similarly for the cook. So in this particular scene, if you start the show, Sydney is making a meal for someone, and this person tells them that she's pregnant, she's very hungry, so Sydney decides to make them an omelet. Even though she's an amazing cook, she can make all these really super sophisticated dishes, but she decides, because she's such a good cook, that an omelet is exactly what that person needs, and she just makes her an omelet. And because she's an amazing cook, it's also an amazing omelet, with all kinds of nice things in it. But the fact is that she knows, kind of, because she's such a good cook, when what's appropriate is not a super fancy dish, but something pretty simple, as long as it's, of course, very well done. So this idea that acting with judgment requires a lot of technique, but also a lot of discernment, is kind of present throughout our lives. Okay, so how do we become great cooks? How do we become great athletes? How do we become great musicians? Or at least very good ones. I mean, this is really amazing, so, okay, at least very good ones. Okay, so let's think about that. Aristotle says, virtues, this kind of excellence that we talked about, require the first exercising them. We become better by actually doing this. And the same is true with skills, since what we need to learn before doing, we learn by doing. For example, we become builders by building, or we become lyre players by playing the lyre. Lyre is an ancient musical instrument. So he says this thing which is kind of puzzling. What we need to learn before doing, we learn by doing. Right? We don't know how to play piano, so we just need to play piano, and that's how we learn. We don't know how to cook, so we just need to cook, and that's how we learn. In other words, practice. You need to practice, you practice, you just do this thing, and that's how you become better. You become a better cook, a better soccer player, a better musician, and a better person by just practicing this kind of excellence. So, in the case of the piano player, you learn to play the piano well by just playing the piano poorly first, but hopefully better as you keep practicing. And the same for, say, being angry. You need to practice being angry well, right? You need to check yourself. Maybe you're too angry. Maybe you're not angry enough in some cases. And then by practicing, you learn to develop this virtue, this excellence of being angry to the right amount, responding well. Same for generosity. You need to practice. How do you become good at philanthropy? You practice. You practice being generous. And the last point I want to make about this is that to do that, you need good teachers, right? Because you can practice bad patterns. You can practice bad fingering patterns as a pianist, right? And you kind of entrench them, playing with your fingers played, which would be very bad, or you can entrench kind of bad cooking techniques. So you need good teachers to kind of help you practice well. If you're kind of practicing in a way that's not so great, tell you, no, that's not right. Here is how you should do it. In other words, you need them to kind of embody that skill for you and show you how it's done so you can practice it well rather than practice and kind of learn bad habits. Okay, so let me finish by bringing us back to Athens for just a minute and this painting and ask, okay, how can philosophers teach us to follow our own leads? Which teachers should we choose for ourselves? Thinking about you here in college, but also going further. And I want to just highlight two models that were kind of in our presentation today and suggest that maybe you should seek both of them. So remember Socrates, we had him earlier on. He was the gadfly, right? He was the kind of horsefly on the side, he's the pain in the side, quite literally. He's the teacher that tells you, no, you didn't get it, do it again, that's wrong also, that's not right. Socrates was infamous for walking around Athens and telling people, showing them that they don't know. You think you know what justice is? Tell me. No, that's not right. Let me show you why that doesn't work. So he was always kind of deflating, showing people the holes in their own reasoning, kind of showing them that they're not doing well, that they're failing. We all had teachers like that. We know it's infuriating, but it's also helpful to have someone push you and tell you, no, that's not right, that's not good enough. Do better. Find it in yourself, right? Find something better. So that's one model of teacher. That's kind of the kind of naysayer, right? Telling you, no, that's not it, do it again, find it, it's not it. It's also useful to have teachers in the model of Aristotle. And here I'm thinking of teachers who don't just tell you, that's not right, try again, find it in you, but who also tell you, and here's how it's done. Right? Let me give you a model of what this skill looks like, so you can try and learn it for yourself. So present you with a kind of a model, call it a role model, call it a model of just how this is supposed to be, so you can kind of follow them, imitate them, practice, kind of work that way, do that way, and then eventually, hopefully, you don't need them anymore because you've kind of internalized the skill and you're able to follow your own lead to learn how to do it yourself. So this is all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you all. We got a lot of great questions, so stay in your seats, please. And we're going to ask our speaker, a few of them, if you could stay in your seats, not pack up, that would be great. So the first question was, have you ever felt lost in what you wanted to pursue in life? And if you have, what philosophy guided you through this?
Yeah, great question. Yes, absolutely, and I think I will again and again and again. So in a way, I almost think it's kind of not okay if you don't feel lost, right? Because that means you're kind of complacent. It's kind of what you hear the Socrates telling you, you sure you want to do that? You sure you just don't want to like try something else? Maybe now it's the time to, I don't know, quit and do something completely different. So I think it's very natural to feel this way. I think it's helpful also to, again, I kind of find myself thinking back to this Aristotelian model of kind of finding something that you admire and kind of going with that, right? So or finding a skill that you want to work on, even if you don't know exactly how you use that. So thinking for myself, maybe I know that I want to work on my writing, and it doesn't kind of, even if I'm not sure that I'm going to have a career in this, just kind of use that as something I'm working towards until, again, I can decide what it is that I really want to do. So find those things that you can kind of, that you enjoy, that you think you can be good at, and continue to cultivate them, even when you kind of, the bigger picture or the more general direction still seems a little bit, you know, occluded or mysterious, so you're not sure exactly what it is.
Next question is, how do you adapt philosophy to the real world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, for my signature course, the final assignment is to do that. So I tell my students, how are you going to use that in the real world? And they break into groups, and they work, and they have a proposal, and we have this semester we had an imaginary budget, but we actually, I hope that in future iterations we'll have a real budget. I'm going to ask you for that. So I can tell you about some of the projects my students had. So some of them suggested working on a kitchen, a kind of community kitchen to feed people in the community that are hungry, but they used ideas from Susan Wolf, for example, to say, well, instead of just, you know, handing out a bunch of sandwiches, maybe we should do a kind of collaborative process so students can also kind of reflect on what it is that they're doing and also talk to the people they're feeding so they can together kind of identify what is the value in that. So that was one interesting project. Trying to remember what was another group. Another one, other students wanted to rent a table in Speedway and just tell all of you about Susan Wolf, because they really liked her, so they want to just kind of use that idea and bring it out to students to say, to the greater community to say, well, what if we all thought this way? Why don't we try to find this perfect balance between subjective value, what I love, but also what would have a greater impact, and just kind of share that with other students. So that was another proposal that students in my class proposed for the final project, of a way of kind of taking out to the real world. So I think there are a lot of creative ways, and I'm kind of learning from the students what they take from it, and what they think, how they can affect their lives.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk tonight. Let's give another round of applause. Thank you for attending. We appreciate it. Have a wonderful night.
Have a good spring break.
She came up, she's like,
Testing 1, 2, 3. Hi.